Welcome, everyone. My clock says 2 p.m. Eastern, so we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you all so very much for joining us today. My name is Natalie Slocum. I'm the Strategic Partnerships Director here at Aurora Institute. And thank you for joining the Aurora Institute Symposium All Fall webinar series. Today, we are going to be discussing the topic of using research and development to redesign, immediately implementable methods and practices to accelerate learning and results for all kids. You can go to the next slide, please. And as you probably have heard by now, we are transitioning our in-person symposium to a virtual convening, which will be on October 26th through the 28th. So please continue to save the date. More details are forthcoming there, but we're also hosting this series of all fall sessions leading up to and following that main symposium event. And this webinar in particular is part of a special series focused on research and building the evidence base for K-12 personalized learning. So before I hand it over to this esteemed panel of my colleagues here today, I have just a few tech details to run over quickly. We'd love you to introduce yourself in the chat box. We'd love to know who you are, where you're from, what organization you're with, and how long you've been working in the field so that we can kind of gauge who's in the room with us today. And we invite you to use the chat to ask some questions, but also to answer each other's questions and to share your own insights and resources. We really encourage a rich dialogue there and to really use that as a place where we can be interactive and network with one another. And we invite you to share what you're learning on social media too. You can use hashtag Aurora 2020 and you can tag us at Aurora_INST. And I'll just quickly mention that today's webinar will be recorded and archived. You'll be able to find it on our website, but we'll also send you an email within the next few business days that'll have that link available for you. So you'll be able to access the conversation and the slides if you need to in the future and share them with your colleagues. So with that, I'm so grateful, Nick, next slide please, to have this panel of colleagues with us. We have Anirban, Nick, and Sarah, all from Transcend. And I mentioned I'm Natalie Slocum, Strategic Partnerships Director at Aurora. And I will let each of these wonderful colleagues introduce themselves. So Anirban, why don't we start with you?
Sure, hello, my name is Anirban Bhattacharya. I'm a partner at Transcend. I've been there for about 3 years, and I'm excited to work with all of you today. I'll send it over to Nick.
Hey everyone, I'm going to try and control the shout outs. I want to do this seeing people on the screen. I love you all, I miss you all. I'm Nick Namba. I came to Transcend after spending 6 years in the Unified School District, and I am excited that we get to talk about R&D processes today, and I'll pass it over to Sarah.
Sarah, you're on mute.
I was trying to use my phone audio. Can you hear me now? Okay, great. Sorry, it's my first time trying to do that. Hi, everybody. I'm really excited to be here with this amazing group. And my name's Sarah Ross, and I'm also a partner at Transcend, and I run the Transcend design community, which we'll talk about a little bit later on the call. I have been in the education innovation space for about 20 years and I'm really excited to be on this call today with all of you. Thanks.
Great, so I see a lot of the introductions coming in. If you could take a minute, and we just want to throw an R&D question out at you. We know from Instagram that a lot of people over the last few months have been learning how to cook new types of foods. So if there's one thing that, that you learned that was new in the last couple months, please share that in the chat. And if there's something really challenging about it, please share that as well. And we'll just take a minute to kind of see what people have been cooking up over the quarantine.
And for those of you wondering, in case you missed it, we changed the title to How to Make Yourself Hungry. That's the whole purpose of today's session.
Awesome. Well, please keep sharing. I saw the first couple that I saw were some bread recipes like sourdough. And that's what really inspired me when I first started seeing people's pictures. But my wife has celiac, so I thought it'd be a little insensitive to bring a bunch of flour into the house and start learning how to bake. And so what I tried to do is figure out how to bake with gluten-free flour. And my most challenging thing was to work at the consistency. So a lot of times the inner part was gooey and the outer part was harder. And so every week I worked on, how to make this recipe better and how to change up the temperature and the ingredients. And what I noticed is I was having a lot of fun doing it. It was relevant. It was something I wanted to do. It was something I was interested in. I got to make something that I like and that my family liked. It was very social. And what's really cool is I probably learned a lot of the same skills that many of you learned if you were doing some baking over the quarantine as well. So Nick, if you go to the same slide, what we're trying to figure out is how do we create this spirit in schools where we are excited about piloting and we have a system and a way to improve rather than just picking a bunch of things to change over the summer and then waiting until the following summer to change more stuff. So if you go to the next slide.
Great. I'll chime in here for a bit. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of background on Transcend. I think everyone can hear me this time, right? Okay, great. Our vision is that truly all young people are able to learn in ways that help them to thrive and really transform the world. And our mission is to focus on school communities and the communities of families and students related to those schools to create and then spread extraordinary, equitable learning environments for those students. And the way that we do that is through, one of the ways is through deep partnerships with school communities and also a fully fleshed out R&D process, which we're really excited to share with you today. I think I'll pass it to the next slide.
Great. So we have a very simple agenda today that's going to follow a pattern. So first, we're going to describe what our R&D process is and what we like to call our conditions for innovation. And then we're going to take you through an R&D cycle. These steps we did not invent. They've been around for generations, used in many other fields. But what we're going to do is at each step, we're going to show you an example and explain the concept. And then we're going to provide you with an R&D template, so you'll be able to make a copy of a Google Doc that you can use to design your pilot. We're going to give you time to do that. And then we'll also break you out into breakout rooms in 3 separate times so that you can share what you're working on with other people. I'm super excited about that because that's one thing that's hard to recreate virtually from the Aurora Symposium. And so I'm excited to meet a lot of you. So we can go on to the next slide.
All right. Now, if you didn't catch it, we're going to do this in the next 51 minutes, just to be clear. We don't have like a 3-day seminar. So if you thought you signed up for that one, that's at a different time. So in the next 50 minutes, we're going to get through these bullet points. I think one of the interesting aspects about R&D processes in itself, as coming out of a school district for many years, just the thought of R&D sometimes is intimidating. And one of the things we want to work through today is just how do you dispel that? How do you just call this continuous improvement? How do you think about it as a process that has to take place for the benefit of all kids and stakeholders? And so we'll dig into that. Today, let's start with just an overview of the R&D process in itself. And so the very first step is to define your task at hand. And so you have to determine what you want to pilot. Again, this is not going to be the most scientific or academia related language. This is meant to simply in an hour put something in front of a group of people that says, what could I do with this? How could I use this right now That was the promise out of the description, and that's what we hope to do moving forward. So step one, you can't do anything until you determine what you want to pilot. After you determine that, you need to think about how are you going to conduct and learn from the pilot itself. There are questions that you need to consider and build, and then there are components to those questions that you need to think deeply about before you decide how large you want to do a scale of the work, or how small you might want to go in terms of the microness of the focus. The third one is, what can you build or what can you borrow? One of the biggest misnomers, and I would say, like, when I was in Lindsay, one of the things that I fell victim to all the time was feeling like it was my responsibility to create from scratch X, Y, or Z. I knew that that was not right, and yet I still found myself wanting to do that. Over the last year, especially since I've been in a Transcend, I've just come to double down on this fact that there are so many amazing people that are doing so much amazing work across the country. And it's just silly, inefficient, and ineffective to not go and grab some things sometimes and use that as a foundation. So step three is not just building. It is also wondering, like, what could you borrow? And it's wondering what you can borrow about whatever question that you had, so that you can get to whatever conclusion that you want to learn about around your pilot. The next one is running the actual tasks, running the thing. So how are you going to actually do it? The logistics of who, when, where, etc., as well as thinking about evidence. Lots of people do the test and they do the running, but they don't consider the type of evidence or the way you want that collected or where that's going to live. And all of those things have later implications to maybe not getting some of the data that you want, not having the cleanest data that you thought you would have, as well as many other components. So really getting you to think about that. And then the last step of the process is learning from the pilot and charting out the next steps. So you get together, you synthesize everything that you collected in terms of evidence. You ask your questions and wonder, what does this mean for what we were focused on? And then the lovely last arrow here, you start all over again. There's no reason to stop. It is not a end of a R&D. It's not the R&D stop end of journey process. It is consistent and ongoing, and this always lives throughout what you do. And so you start over, whether that's getting deeper into the question that you were piloting or whether it's time to switch over into something else. We love to talk philosophy. I love to also talk reality, right? So let me give you the example, an example of this process and its completion. And so when I was at Lindsay Unified, we were constantly wondering, as an organization focused on competency-based, performance-based learning, that is very much reliant upon learners, students, understanding what they know, what they're good at, what they struggle at, where they're going to need help, how to push themselves forward. So this student awareness of their academic skills as well as other skills was essential for us to have. And we didn't necessarily have an understanding of how, we didn't have the answer that we wanted. That was a process that kids could follow to make sure that they were heightening this ability. And so that was our define while I was there. We thought, what if we used a goal setting process, a form? Will it increase the student awareness of their academic skills? Clearly, this is kind of a giveaway to say, we didn't run this process once. We had a lot of misnomers. We had a lot of steps. Let's go with the first step. The first step is just setting the goal in itself would be the solution to this. And if kids set the goals, they would clearly know where they are in their academic skills. And the data says goals help increase the student's likelihood of knowing that, but it doesn't say that they're able to understand themselves holistically, or that they're able to understand how that goal relates back to their actual scope and sequence of learning. And that's what we really wanted in a competency-based system. And so our first cycle with all of this was a miss because we thought that the form itself was going to be the solution. We had to go back multiple times, and I'll tell you about the end as we go on. What did we have to do? What we chose to do is we went out there and we borrowed. We borrowed content from Smart Goals. There's tons of it out there, whether it's forms or documents or meetings or any of that kind of stuff. But what we had to do was build Lindsay Unified's context into the authentic process that we wanted kids to go through. This is what we learned. The first time it was just whether the form itself would solve the problem. The second time it came around, it was that we knew that we needed to have the form, but it had to be connected to a Lindsay unified context authentic process. What was the data chat process going to be with the child so that they could absorb more than just the goal itself and have more of a goal orientation? The next one, logistics. How are we going to collect it? So we said, let's do it in 10-day cycles. Let's use 6 of our educators across 2 grade levels and content areas to try and get a wider span to make sure that we weren't just narrowing it down to being able to set math, because ironically, like when you go to goal setting, the first thing people want to go to is math because they feel like it's so cut and dry. Nobody ever wants to touch ELA or humanities. And so we had to put it out there and say, like, we're here to talk about the gray as well as the things that are cut and dry. And so we built a system to test that. And then we go through, and our learn from the first time around was it built compliance of action, but not the authentic increase of student awareness and their academic skills that we wanted, which meant what? The all important last arrow. We had to go back to the process. We had to think about the process. All of this leading to, and this isn't part of the slide, but it's like, if I didn't tell you this, I would feel like I was left on a cliff and I wanted to know. It's like all of this ended up being, after multiple iterations of going through this process, that we had to employ a system where the superintendent was talking to, and the deputy soup was talking to the site administrators using the same data analysis process that the site administrators would then take and use with their teachers, that the teachers would then take and use with the students, and in which case you now had an entirely comprehensive system of data awareness and an authentic purpose for why questions were being asked, but one that flowed all the way through the system so that the superintendent could be on a school site and ask a student a question and know that they would be prepared because it is the same type of thing that they are doing with the site administration. So this is one example of how this process might actually play out. And this is the other part where it's like, great, if you got super excited about this and you want to take this, that is the whole point of this session. So let's talk more, but this could be the thing you want to dig into. What we don't want to ignore here is that inherently there are other things at play, because the reality of the system is that there are other things at play often. At Transcend, we have these conditions for innovations. It's a framework where there are these 5 conditions that should exist. And these conditions live in the soil, if you will, of what we do, where conviction of the work, clarity of the work, having capacity to do the work, having the coalition to do the work, and having the all-around culture to do this work has to be right. And so it would be a disservice not to call out the conditions as having huge impact on things like R&D processes or continuous improvement cycles. Because if you don't have the right culture, then an R&D process can feel like a compliance related issue where you were told us to do this cycle. And so we did it and here's the result. But you don't really own, because it's not in the culture yet, that this is what we do here, that we are a learning organization that always refines itself and gets better for the sake of the kids, for the sake of the parents, for the sake of the staff. That is only if you have these conditions. This is also enough to be a totally different session. So we are not digging into this today, but afterwards you will get the deck. Anything that you see with a blue hyperlink up in the title or anywhere on the page is actually linked. So when you get the deck, please know that you can just click on that. It'll take you right to all of our work on the conditions of innovation if you want to dig further into this section.
Great, thank you, Nick. One thing I love one thing I love about working with Nick is when you ask him a question, he'll, instead of telling you the answer first, he'll tell you the 7 things he tried and failed and how he learned his answer. And I think R&D is really in his bones, as you can see from the work he did for the past decade, really, in multiple districts. So let's get started with this cycle. So we're going to start with define, and we'll give you an opportunity to practice, and I'm going to show you an example first. So if you go to the next slide. As you can see, it's the first step in the process. It's the most important step in the the first step in the process, the most important thing to start with. And a lot of times it's the hardest thing to actually decide what to pilot on. And we're going to give you an example now that I think that will help you choose, not only during the session today, but moving forward on what you want to pilot. So the first thing we'll figure out is, what do you want to pilot? The second is, who will be piloting this? You know, being very specific on the learners, the teachers, the staff, the admin that'll be involved. And then the why, and this is where the science of learning and pedagogy and information from your community and feedback from teachers and staff. That's where all of this comes into play. It's really hard to pull off a pilot, like the conditions say, if people don't believe in what they're doing. And so taking that into consideration right off the bat is super important. So let's first talk about what you will pilot. This is like so hard to figure out what the right grain size is. And like this metaphor really helped me understand it. That if you think of an entire experience in your school as a pizza, you have 3 different opportunities for smaller scale pilots to help you learn before you roll out the whole pizza. And so that is like the whole thing, but at a smaller scale. You can just pilot a piece of it, or you can pilot a critical ingredient of it. And all of those are valid, and you learn very different things from them. But pilots can follow any of these sort of grain sizes. And if you go to the next slide, I can give you one example. So one example is if the whole pizza is your school's social emotional learning program. If you were going to pilot one or a smaller pizza, so like a personal pizza, then you would say, okay, we're just going to pilot our entire social emotional learning program just in 5th grade and just in the 1st quarter before we roll it out to our whole school so we can learn and refine. Another way to approach piloting is that we are going to pilot just the first block of the day, like a 45-minute morning block, where we're going to incorporate SEL practices and do that and learn from that. Another example could be, maybe you're moving from a SEL curriculum to something you're building on your own and you want to pilot that. And that would be just like one critical ingredient of your pilot. So one of the jokes that this reminds me of, my brother-in-law always says, any pizza can be a personal pizza if you put your mind to it. And that's sort of how, that's honestly like how I approached R&D in schools in the past, where in the spring, you get all the leaders together, all of your teachers, and you say, what didn't work this year? And then you go, and you build through the spring and through the summer, and you kind of come up with what's the big thing you're going to change for the next school year. And then when teachers come back in the fall, you sort of roll out that big change and then spend the fall fixing all the things that come up when you implemented the whole pie. And then in the spring, you sort of start over. So I'm trying to avoid the challenge that my brother-in-law gave me at a restaurant in Chicago, where the pizzas were definitely not personal pizzas, but we tried to make them one. You can go on to the next slide. So I'm going to share this template with you in a second. This is just going to be a Google Doc. This first top section I'm going to go through with you now, and you'll have your own copy and start putting in your own information. So let me show you what these first 3 boxes are on the next slide. So here's an example from Summit Public Schools, an actual R&D. We pulled these from an actual R&D plan that they used. They collaborate a lot with Lindsay Unified, so we're going to use the same SMART goal example. So they picked having students set a SMART goal for their self-directed learning block and post it on their desk so the teacher and peers can see and support it. You can see that there's a lot of grain sizes here, so we don't know where they were, if this was just a critical ingredient and they already had the block designed, the piece. But you can see that this is what they wanted to test, and they were very specific on who were going to test these. So all 9th graders on Tuesdays and Thursdays, self-directed learning blocks at 2 high schools. This might seem like, when your science teacher took you through the scientific process and you kind of put your blocks in, and then as you move through it, you kind of forget what you put at the beginning. I love these questions because this will also help you figure out what to measure. And so not only do you have to measure your goal, which is figuring out if students are building SMART goals, if that's impacting their ability to understand where they are academically in a competency-based system, but it also makes sure that you measure, like, our 9th graders at these 2 high schools setting SMART goals on Tuesdays and Thursdays in the self-directed learning block. And a lot of times we forget to capture metrics on our implementation, because we can't really say if this is a success or not if we don't know whether people did it with fidelity. And so the final part here is to really explain why you're doing this. And so in this case, they were really trying to test whether students spending time setting their goals and having teachers and peers helping them if that makes their self-directed learning experience more successful and if they're able to own their own learning. So now I'm going to turn it over to you. So if you go to the next slide, here are 2 links which the Aurora Institute people will paste. So on the left, if you click on that, that will make a copy of the Google Doc automatically. You may have to log into G Suite to access that copy. So it'll be yours. It won't be shared with us, but you're happy to share it with whoever you want. And on the right, if you're kind of stuck, if you didn't come into this call with like something that you really want to pilot, I made a link to a resource that we recently shared that has 15 different remote learning practices that people are trying to figure out right now. And if you click on them, there's an explanation of that practice, but there's also like 7 or 8 different school resources that you can click on. And those resources could be critical ingredients. They could be the piece of pizza. They could be a personal pizza or an entire pizza. And so for whatever is helpful to you, you can put your own example into the template, or you can select one from here and kind of use it as a sample. And even if you don't use the remote learning practices right now, it is something that I think is super interesting. And all of the school examples come from our library, which is published on our website. So later on in the call today, we'll show you where that library is so you can have an access to, I think it's approaching 300 different resources on how to implement these practices in remote learning. So I'm going to give you about 5 minutes. It could be that something isn't working or you need some more clarification. Please use the chat and we'll monitor that. So for the next 5 minutes, just do the define section. So those 3 questions that I highlighted. And we'll answer your questions in the chat. We'll see you in 5 minutes. We have about 30 seconds more. Okay, I know that was probably not enough time, but hopefully you got a few thoughts in. We will now break you out into breakout rooms of 3, and you'll share your what you worked on those 3 boxes for define. But we also want you guys to get to know each other. So after saying your name, your role, and your organization, we just have a silly question: who's your favorite celebrity? And we only have 4 minutes for this, so make sure you guys are all able to share.
Great, thank you. I will be sending everybody into a breakout room right now.
All right, looks like everyone's back. I know that was probably way too short, but we'll keep moving on and then you'll get another chance to share in a moment. So we're gonna move on to step 2. You can take it to the next slide.
All right, so when we shift over to the plan, this is where we start to think about how we'll actually conduct the learning from the pilot. We also hope that you all got a little bit of human touch during those breakout times. That's partially part of this, is to give you a chance to not ask a ton of questions, but please make sure you follow up with people if you want their contact. So as we get into the plan, we're wondering about how we're gonna actually conduct and learn from the pilot. So first thing, who will run the actual pilot? Whether that's a department lead, whether that's a certain grade level lead, whether that's an entire grade level, different content levels, as we discussed before. Where will it actually occur? This could be a site, this could be, again, a certain wing. At high school, it could be a certain department. The when, so when is the most logical for this to take place? And not just logical in terms of convenience, but also logical in terms of when you'll actually get the type of data that is clean and accurate as to do the learning that you want to do. I named this because the plan to do a pilot the 2 weeks before winter break, if you're going to count on consistency and streamlined thinking from kids, is not generally the best time to run any kind of analysis. And so you probably don't drop that pilot in there. So considering when. The B to this is wondering, what do you want to learn? So this is where we start getting into the fun parts about what type of questions. What does your learning agenda actually look like? What are you trying to learn at a deeper, more granular level here? How will you actually learn that? What are the steps that you're going to take? And then who will do the evidence gathering? Lots of times we leave the table not knowing anything more than the commitment to keep doing something, but not then saying who's going to be the gatherer of all the information, no matter who is doing it, what departments, what different parts of the buildings, or which different schools we might be pulling the information from. So what does this all look like? If we go back and stay consistent with the example that we've been talking about, the who will run the pilot might look something like all the 9th grade teachers in the Tuesday, Thursday blocks at 2 of these high schools, so 6 total. It might look like the where then becomes these 2 specific high schools that we're looking at. The when is the first 2 weeks of November during this time block on these days. And so getting as granular as you selected in terms of when the Nirbonne was talking to you about the pie, the piece, the ingredient, is going to determine deeply here on what your specific qualifiers of each of these might look like. As we go into the 2B, we talk about what do we want to learn. This is the part that I start getting super giddy, because this is when we start getting really deep into the learning. What do you want to learn about? There are many ways, and you'll see on your template, there's a block down below that is like research specific to help you understand the different types of things you can learn. I chose to specify just one of the outcomes ones because those are generally the ones that we go after and the ones that are a little bit more obvious. And so I put the outcomes one up here, which is, do students complete more focus areas? If they do this goal setting process, why or why not? How does it vary? How are you going to learn that? Here is the way we are going to actually do the evidence collection and which evidence we're going to collect. We're going to document the focus area completion inside the platform. We're going to do these observations, ask the students about the experience, and then the clarity around who will do the conducting of the evidence gathering. So-and-so will do the pulling of the data to analyze, and then this team will maybe conduct the observations so that we can get the data that we need. All this to say, at the end of the day, you have this blank template in front of you. You got to define in step number 1 what it was that you were considering for this pilot. And now we're going to get a little bit more granular. Now we're going to ask you, who's going to do that? Where is it going to be and when? And then we're going to ask you to spend just 3 minutes digging into what do you want to learn? So this is where you start documenting your questions. You gave us a topic and you defined it, but what do you specifically want to learn about that topic? How will you learn about that topic? And then who will conduct the evidence collection? In this part, we're going to give you 3 minutes to do a little bit of solo work, and then we will kick you back out to the small breakout rooms to talk to some more of your peers. So we will be quiet for the next 3 minutes. All right. Again, we know that this is not built in so that you can be able to fill out everything to its full completion. But what it is to get you started, to get you thinking, to find more people inside the community of schools, research, et cetera, that might be able to tap into your conversations later and make those connections. So we aren't expecting you to jump in after 3 minutes and comprehensively talk about these products with peers, but we just want you to put your ideas out there, get to know what people are thinking, get to know whether or not you want to talk to them later on after this session. So we are going to move forward, and we're going to send you back out to a new round of 2A and 2B discussions. So don't go back to step 1, don't cheat, only stay on step 2A and 2B. And the qualifier here, instead of celebrity, is season. So you're going to tell them your name, your role, your org, and your favorite season. And then you'll just do a brief intro into what you put down for your 2A and 2B. And we will see you back here in about 4 minutes.
All right. Thanks, Nick. I'll be sending you all into breakout rooms right now.
Natalie, I think Nick might be getting off and on. I don't know if he sent you a message, but we're going to skip the next breakout. And we've just been messaging. We're just going to go straight through and then send it to Sarah for the ending.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I was looking at the time as well. That sounds great. And
Great.
folks should be coming back in about 20 seconds.
Great. Nick, I just let her know that.
Sounds good. I'll go back to sharing my screen. I've already hidden all the slides and reviewed it, so we should be good.
Oh, wow. Cool.
Looks like everybody's back.
Great. All right. Let's roll through to 2C. So we wanted to make sure that we didn't skip what's sometimes the boring stuff of like scheduling out meetings around the meeting making. But if you look at 2C, there's a few things that are super important here. So when will you do the meaning making of this pilot that you're going to be collecting data on? Who will do that synthesis? And there's some very important questions here. So if you look at the next slide, in the example that we've been showing you, and the first question of when, sketching out when that meaning making should happen is super important. And then who will make that meaning making is super important as well. A lot of times you may have a great pilot, you may be getting input from students and parents and teachers, and you collect a whole bunch of data, but then at the end of the day, you take all that information and it's a group of like 3 or 4 people, usually the leaders from the district or the school, who kind of look at all that data and make all the decisions. And so one way to avoid that is by really scheduling public meaning-making meetings, so that your job isn't to take it just to take in all of the data and analyze it, but to prepare it in a way where all of your stakeholders can analyze it for themselves. And going through this process will really help you, really surface ideas that maybe are outside of the purview of the leadership team or whoever is used to making those type of decisions. So we're going to give you a couple more minutes to sketch out. Obviously you won't be sending out calendar invites right now, but sketching out when that could happen for your pilot for the next couple of minutes on the next slide.
Actually not. So quickly, surprise, for us to truly, and we did this purposefully, right? For us to truly live through R&D, we want to show you what real-time adjustments might actually look like. We're just kidding. Best laid plans. We wanted you to have time to go and build some of these other pieces. So we think it's important for you to have a little context of the next piece, and then an offering that we have for the group, just to continue getting support from us or others who you connected with today. So we do want to say build and borrow comes next. Part of the build and borrow process is, again, do I create this thing, materials, or do I go and grab materials? And one of the things we want to make sure that you access when you get to this piece is there are many things out there. These are 2 examples. One of this is our internal Transcend library, which is out there. It gives you access to tons of entire school models, all the way down to individual artifacts from school models that you might be wondering about that are just already tested. People have piloted these things and they're very worthwhile. And so we've kind of curated these things and that address. The Learning Accelerator is another organization that has similar items where they've curated resources for you that you can use moving forward. And we wanted you to have these available to you going forward, so that when you get to this step of building and borrowing, you'll be able to do that effectively. We also want to give you opportunities to work with more people. So as you move forward for testing and learning, I'm going to open this up over to Sarah, who will talk to you about something we just wanted to offer everybody that came to the session today.
Thanks, Nick. So yes, as you can tell with today's fast-paced small breakout rooms and the sessions, that we've just hit the tip of the iceberg, and we really want this conversation and this work together and collaboration to continue. And so we have a couple of opportunities that I just wanted to share really quickly. And one is a private Slack channel. So Transcend uses Slack to communicate internally and also with our Transcend design community. And we are going to, or we have created a private Slack channel for this group. And if you're interested in joining, I'll give you information in a moment. And you can post your plans in here, get feedback from each other, get feedback from Transcend employees, and continue this work in the R&D process and piloting and testing. So that's pretty fun and exciting. And if you go to the next slide, I'll just tell you a little bit more about the Transcend design community in general. Some of you are already members, and in fact, we have the old leader of the TDC and its former iteration on the call, but I think he's dropped, Tyler. But anyway, the Transcend design community is this really exciting, special network of innovators, change makers, school design teams, school leaders, consultants, thinkers, experts that have come together through Transcend being the hub to collaborate. So when you join, and it's totally free, you get access to our Slack channel, you get access to our webinars, and also our email newsletters. But what you get with that is really a network of people, so you're not reinventing the wheel, access to resources, cutting edge ideas, access to feedback, and like you can ask questions and people will answer them. It's super collaborative. And so there's a form in here, and we'll throw that in the chat box. If you want to join just the private Slack channel, there's an option to do that. And if you want to join the Transcend design community as a whole, there's access to like 8 more channels that all have a different focus, like COVID-19 support, anti-racism, things like that. So if you fill out that form that Jessica just put in the chat box, then I will get you set up in both the Slack channel and the TDC. So really hope you join our community and help us learn together with and from you. And with that, I'll pass it. It looks like we're over time, but I'll pass it back to Nirban in case anyone's staying, just to close.
I think we're good. Thank you so much, Sarah. I'm looking forward to continuing the conversation with many of you on Slack, and our email is on here as well. I'm available to stay for some questions. I don't know if Aurora Institute has paid for this hotel ballroom that long, but it's really great working with all of you.
I haven't seen any questions come in. So if anybody has any last minute burning questions, feel free to throw those in the chat box. And please just join me in giving a warm thank you to our panelists today. What a wonderful action-packed session. We so appreciate you sharing your expertise and insights with us. Nick, if you don't mind going to the next slide, please. I would just like to invite you all to join us for upcoming webinars that we have leading up to our symposium. This is just a snapshot of webinar sessions we have in the month of September, but there are many, many more. So please head to our website and browse through those, and we hope to see you in future sessions. So please consider registering and attending. I haven't seen any other questions come through. So why don't we go ahead and just move to close the session. Again, thank you all so much for joining us today. We hope you really enjoyed the breakout sessions and such rich, wonderful content. It's so helpful,
Natalie?
especially in the times that we're in today. So
Natalie,
again,
I just wanted to mention, I'm sorry for interrupting. If we closed out, I just wanted to mention that Imani said she has a question.
Okay, do you mind, I don't see where that is, Elliot, if you don't mind just jumping in.
Oh, Imani, if you want to type in your question, or Natalie, I don't know if you're able to unmute Imani.
Sure.
Imani, Natalie's working on unmuting you.
You should be unmuted if you want to go ahead and just speak.
Oh, she says her mic isn't working.
Okay.
Imani, are you trying to type in your question now, or? Well, why don't we wait and see? And Natalie, I think I interrupted your wrap up if there was anything else you wanted to say there.
No, that's quite all right. We're flexible and we don't have to close right now. We can stick around for a couple more minutes and wait for Amani's question. But in the meantime, please check out our website. I know I mentioned our symposium is coming up in October, so stay tuned for more information there. And we'll go ahead and close and invite anybody who wants to go ahead and stick around for Amani's question. But otherwise, we hope to see you in future webinars. And it looks like Amani is wondering if she can get help on a remote learning prototype. I'm not sure who wants to tackle that question.
I can give two thoughts. One is if you are creating your own prototype and would like feedback, then filling out the form will be helpful because we'll all get added to a Slack channel and you can ask your question there. And obviously the three of us, Nick, Sarah, and I will be there, but a lot of our Transcend colleagues, the colleagues that were on this call, and then if you choose to join the Transcend design community, you can ask our entire network. So you'll have access to almost 1,000 people who can give you some feedback. But if you're looking for maybe a remote learning model, then I would also say going to the library that we shared, where you can find different things that you could adapt and prototype that other schools have used, not just in our country, but internationally as well, since many other countries started returning back to school earlier than us. So those are two ways that I think we can address your question.
Great. Well, thank you again so very much. We appreciate you all and hope to stay connected. Take care, everyone. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you for a great webinar.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, everyone.